compared to recording. Recording hardwares. Software and this is not like
quite enjoy that.
it's probably like people say that.
Yeah. I like
Okay.
interesting. Thanks to the files, we can actually start running for positions.
We'll do that.
Walked up in like a completely wrong order.
I'm not thinking. We're not thinking. I mean,
So we're just fingers crossed that we can get some points. What is?
Interesting. Referendum. There is space. I also don't have a space in my schedule. I'm thinking in California. One is not expected. Actually, related. The
Just
It's only on the. There's a high, I'm looking like. I don't think so. Yeah. Yeah. This one is.
Well, all of them.
Yeah. That's basically what happened. It's not. Just.
I like this.
Okay, let's get started. We just have 3 classes today and 2 next week after Thanksgiving. There's a bunch of assignments that will be due by the end of the semester. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So today itself, we will essentially get into Bayes network learning because we talked about Bayes networks. We want to learn them directly from data. And then that gets us to talk about Bayesian learning that I have hyped up a huge amount of times during the semester. We will talk a little more about it and see how we go from Bayesian learning to day-to-day maximum likelihood and maximum a posteriori learning. With the MLE, it's just a simple learning, which is optimize the loss function approximately, and MAP, maximum a posteriori learning, would say optimize the loss function subject to some regularization constraint. And in fact, we'll see that that regularization constraint is connected to the probability of that hypothesis. How unlikely is that hypothesis is something that we'll take into account. Okay. As far as the thing here is concerned, I want you to remember 2 things. One essentially is with respect to this course, we have cognitive biases. We are not rational. I mean, in case nobody told you that, we are not rational. We are completely. How many of you have seen Schindler's List? You remember the pink girl? In the mass of people that are passing by, they show one girl in pink gown. The reason Steven Spielberg does that is because we do tend to think this way, that huge numbers of people die. Yeah, it's okay. One person we can focus. That's how we evolved. We can't change that too easily. So, Steven Spielberg obviously is making sure that everybody gets the enormity of the point by focusing on a particular. But then Oscar Wilde actually says something very interesting, that the mark of a truly educated man is to be deeply moved by statistics. Okay, so in essence, if you want to overcome your evolutionary cognitive biases, then learn to be affected by statistics, which turns out to be statistics that we are doing today, and statistical learning and so on. But really, this is an important thing to keep in mind. Let's see. Okay. Two things before I go forward to more serious stuff. Everybody has some things to be thankful for. This has been a hard semester for lots of us. I am thankful for those of you who showed up for every class. Okay, so I would like those of you who showed up for every class to stand. Everyone. So you have whatever the reason. Okay, thank you. Okay. No, this is a landscape mode, don't worry. I got a very high quality font, so it has taken the whole time. Thank you. So I'm particularly thankful to you people. It's a lot more fun teaching people even behind the masks. Did you come to the class all this? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. So it was fun that you all came, and I'm sure lots of you came for whatever. I think mostly people attended quite a bit of classes. Normally, the usual thing is that everybody who attends all the classes, we just give them an A+ and be done with it. But I know that you're honor students, we don't want that sort of a thing. So we'll figure out some other way of thanking you later on. Okay. This came in the email. For you guys, this is one of the things that you need to do by 12/1. 12/2 is the last class. 12/1, December 1st, late night, 10:59. By that time, you should have submitted. This is basically reflections. I don't know how many of you know this. Socrates basically said, an unexamined life is not worth living. Okay, so if you're done a whole semester of this course, you should examine what did you learn, not just the one little grade that you get. So that sort of forces you to think about what you may have learned. So this is a bunch of qualitative questions, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5. Basically things of the kind. List 5 or more ideas of AI that you appreciated over the course of the semester and explain why they appeal to you. List 3 or more non-trivial technical details and so on and so forth. Okay, this is open-ended. You can write as much as you want, but at least as many as I asked for. And that's sort of basically, I will read them. This is completion credit, but I will read them. And if it makes interesting sense to me, I might even comment on those. And then it, just in case you need an actual motivation, it corresponds to 10% of your final exam grade. So that would be like basically, but the way you do this is you just complete this and post it as a comment below this. For many of you, you don't even know that the class has a Piazza. So this will be the first time you learn it. Okay, so you'll have to figure that out. Okay, please understand that this is about the course, despite the instructor and the TA. It has nothing to do with whatever you thought about instructor and TA. This is just about what you understood about the ideas. Okay, and you could have done it by being forced to read the textbook. That's completely fine. Okay. Then, as I said, there is a separate thing that all of you probably got from the college on the student, whatever the instructor evaluation. So this is where you yell at the instructor and the TA. Of course, you can always yell at it in the ratemyprofessor.com. That's always a fun place. But certainly this will be a more useful thing, because I will, when the semester is over, is when we get it, and I normally send the entire thing to the rest of all of you. So that's the usual thing I do. So you get a sense of how people took the class. But my point of showing this is, A, to encourage you to take part in this too, but to say that this is separate from this. So you don't need to be nice to me. This is not about me when you're writing this public stuff. The private stuff, you can do whatever you want. Okay, but that's anonymous. Okay. The third thing is the PSET 5 base networks has been assigned. I think actually it's already been assigned, or it'll just be assigned. I think it's been assigned already. And it is due, it's going to be due on 11/30. Okay, which is basically a week from now. Okay. And the base networks project that I mentioned, we decided to make it optional and extra credit. Okay. So if you're doing well, if you don't have time, you don't want to do that, that's fine. Because I think there's a bit of an overlap between the homework and the mini project. Mini project basically makes you play with the base network constructor. Okay, so there's no code to be written. It's mostly conceptual. So, you know, for people who want to spend time on this, that would be considered like an extra credit thing. And then, so it's optional. You don't have to do it. And your original first grades will be decided without looking at the extra credit. That's the usual. Okay. And then that's due on 12/3. And then 12/3 is also, 12/3 and 12/2 is our last class, which is next Thursday. And 12/9 is the date for the final exam, if we have it in class. Okay. That's basically where it's going to be. And then the week from then, we have to give all the grades and all that stuff. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
We decided whether the final exam will be take home or in class.
I haven't. Is there any strong opinion one way or other? Anybody would like to do it in class? How many people want to do it in class? Oh, by the way, that's the other thing I'm thankful for. At least we haven't found any egregious cheating. Actually, none yet. Maybe we are kind of too gullible and you are extremely good at cheating and we are not finding it. But I think it is nice to be able to trust, because you know that's the only way you can learn. You know, so I'm fine with. So and then I guess I should ask the other questions. How many are interested in taking it as a take home again? Okay, and the few who did not raise, they prefer no exams whatsoever. I understand. What?
If you make it a take home, is it possible for it to be assigned earlier than the end date?
No, yeah, we will try to be flexible for the take homes. That's the usual thing. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I'll take that under advisement that the class prefers to take home. Okay, so that's that. Any other questions? Yes.
Does sign your name just mean like post it anonymously?
Yes, you have to write. No, not only that. I mean, some of you have crazy Piazza, whatever the handles. So, so I think underneath it, you should just sign your full name. It's under you. So I know who actually said it, right? I mean, even if you're not anonymous, you know, I think Piazza allows you to make handles and some of you have made handles. Which by the way, is a very interesting point. Actually, somebody was pointing out that there are all these worries that with the advent of AI technologies, there's not going to be any such thing as privacy. Everybody will know everything. That's possible. That's one way of argument. The other argument is your generation and maybe the generation that comes after you are already aware of this. Okay. And so you no longer give your name to any place. You make up random handles. And so in fact, there is this theory that probably only the people who actually live in the same home as you might know how you look like. And everybody everywhere else, you will just make up like a GAN photograph. So all of us might look like Brad Pitts and Angelina Jolie's or whatever, okay? Which might be a way of bringing back privacy. It remains to be seen, but that might actually be possible. So anyway, in this particular case, since you might have handles and I need to know who you are, you know, you need to write your name. Any other questions? Okay. Then, oh, I forgot to show this. That mini project is actually base network tool to save Christmas in Springfield. So those of you who are Simpsons fans might want to do it anyway, even if it is just extra credit. So yeah, that's that. Okay, what I'm going to do today is 3 things. quickly complete the discussion on conditional independence assertions and deseparation condition that I just mentioned as I was leaving last class, because that's actually also on the homework, one of the questions in the homework. And then I'll also talk about causality in Bayes networks, and that's a cute point that we should understand that. And then we shift into learning. Okay, and then I'll continue learning next 2 classes more on this. Okay, so basically there's this notion of conditional independence assertions. We are talking about a set of variables X is independent of a set of variables Y given in a set of evidence variables Z. And that is typically written, in this format. X is independent of Y given Z. And what that essentially means is X and all sorts of things it implies. So if X is independent of Y given Z, then the whole bunch of things you can write. X given YZ is the same as X given Z. And similarly, Y given XZ is the same as Y given Z. And X and Y given Z is the same as X given Z times Y given Z. Right? And remember, the whole point of probabilities is how to factorize numbers. We made a big deal about that. So this is why we are interested in conditional independence assertions. So Bayes networks, in fact, the idea is that the fully independent network where everything is independent of everything, that's the maximum number of conditional independences. Basically, everything is independent of everything. So essentially, everything given a evidence is independent again of everything else, because even without evidence, it's independent. Do you understand what I'm saying? So fully independent network is useless in one way, but it's great computationally because you only need n numbers if there are n Boolean random variables. So if that is the one extreme, the other extreme is a fully connected network. One idea might be to, can we just not say how many independences hold and just write that and you exploit those independences. And in some sense, Bayes network topology can be understood as compactly specifying all conditional independences that hold. Okay, that was what we were talking about last class. In particular, some, for example, that a node is independent of its ancestors. A node is independent of its non-descendants given its parents. Non-descendants given its parents. That means both its ancestors as well as its children's parents. It's independent of them given its parents. Okay. The other basically was the Markov blanket. A node is independent of the entire network given its nuclear family. And what is its nuclear family? Its parents, its children, its children's parents. That's the nuclear family. Okay. And that's what's called a Markov blanket. So these we understand, but really the question is, can I answer any arbitrary conditional independence query? And to do that, we basically talked about these 3 things last time: causal chain, A goes B, A causes B causes C, common cause, B causes both A and C, and common effect, B is caused by both A and C. And the interesting thing is that I made 2 important points. One is, if you look at a Bayes network, every junction will be one of these 3 types. Okay, and of those 3 types, it turns out that in the case of causal chain and common cause, you have these independence assertions that hold. If A is causing B is causing C, then A is independent of C given B. And similarly, if B is causing both A and C, once again, A is independent of C given B. And the third one is the troublesome case, where if B is caused by both A and C, then the moment you know B, A and C become dependent. Do you understand what I'm saying? The first 2 talk about independences that will hold. The third one talk about the dependences that will hold if the evidence is given. Okay, and so this is, we talked about this, and then the question then becomes, if you look at any arbitrary Bayes network and you're focusing on the nodes X, the nodes Y, and the evidence nodes Z, which are basically, in this gray region. So the question is, can I tell whether X is independent of Y given E? I mean, independent of X is independent of Y given Z, where Z is the evidence nodes. Okay. So the way to do it essentially is consider every path starting from X nodes, ending in Y nodes, and focus what that path is doing in the Z nodes. And at the Z, they might either, the two ends of that path might be coming in, going out, or one coming in, one going out. Exactly the three types I talked about. If it is one coming in, one going out, are both going out, that is common cause and causal chain. So Z, if it is there, given Z, X, that particular path is blocked. That means the probabilistic influences won't flow from X to Y if the Z in the middle is given as evidence, and it is either part of a common cause path or causal chain path. Okay. And the third case is if in fact Z, the common effect case is if in fact any of the paths between X and Y are ending in the evidence node with two arrows coming in, that means that evidence is being pushed both by X side and the Y side. It's being caused both by X and Y. Then if that Z is part of the evidence, then that path is not blocked. So for the path to be blocked, Z should not be part of the evidence. Do people get this? It's just three pieces. So I will state that path here. X is independent of Y given the evidence or Z nodes. If every undirected path, act as if the path is just from X to Y, you just consider the path, ignoring the directions. But then look at the directions only at the evidence nodes. And if the evidence node direction is either common cause or causal, you're okay. If not, that path is not blocked. Okay, so that's the three pieces. A path is blocked. So basically you say X is independent of Y given E if every undirected path from X to Y is blocked by the evidence. It's kind of blocked. And the evidence can only block paths if in fact the arrows at the evidence node are common cause arrows or causal chain arrows. If it is common effect arrows, that means the evidence node is being caused, then that path won't be blocked. So you better not have those guys as part of the evidence. If you do, then that particular path is not blocked anymore. And in general, you will say X is completely independent of Y given E if every possible path from an X node to the Y node is blocked. Reasonable enough idea. You see what I'm saying? Now, you might be thinking that really, if you have a normal graph and you will say there are lines like this, you would say that if I put a cut set on the graph and I cut off those edges, these sets of edges will be disconnected. Right? So in a way, independence is trying to capture the notion of disconnectedness of the nodes, except for this third condition. The third condition makes it not be just about disconnection. You should make sure that any node, any evidence node, which winds up having being a common effect, that means from both X side and the Y side, the arrows are converging on that node. It better not be in the cut set. Okay. In fact, it turns out that there is an entirely different configuration of graphical models. These are called probabilistic graphical models. And these are basically what we looked at is Bayes nets. And there's this other ones called Markov nets or Markov random fields. And Markov nets have unidirectional arrows. I mean, that's the convention. And they essentially have the graph semantics. You would say an evidence disconnects X from Y. If you remove the evidence nodes and the edges coming onto them, X and Y get separate. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, but we didn't talk about Markov nets. But this is basically what we are looking at. Okay. For Bayes nets, the fact that you can have this explaining away, which is what the third condition is doing, which is an important part of plausible reasoning, that makes the separation condition be different from just a straightforward disconnection. Okay, that's it. So I can show you a couple of examples. So here in this network, burglary, earthquake, alarm, John calls, Mary calls. I'll ask a couple of questions. In fact, these are kind of questions you will have in one of the homework questions asked you on a different network. So is burglary independent of Mary? Is burglary independent of Mary given alarm? Yeah, right? Because at the alarm, the arrows are going, one going in, one going out. Right? So if you give alarm, then burglary will be independent of Mary. How about, is John and Mary independent of earthquake given alarm? So John and Mary independent of earthquake given alarm. The only paths from alarm to either John or Mary will go through earthquake, and both times they are in the causal chain direction at the earthquake. So when you give the earthquake, those paths get blocked. You guys get this? Why not? So basically all I'm saying is John, so from earthquake, you can, here is one path from earthquake to John calls. Another path, earthquake to Mary calls. For each of those paths, you see they will come in and go out of alarm. So they're both causal chains. So alarm blocks both those paths. Since both paths are blocked, then they're actually separate. You guys get this? It's just a very simple idea. Okay. Is burglary independent of earthquake? Just given nothing. Is burglary independent of earthquake given nothing? Let's look. What is the only path between, one obvious path between burglary and earthquake is burglary to alarm to earthquake. But there, alarm is a common effect. If you gave alarm, burglary and earthquake would have been dependent. Since you didn't give it, that path is actually blocked. Do you see what I'm saying? Which is exactly what you are hoping to say, that basically burglary and earthquake upfront are independent. I mentioned this. I mean, normally burglary and earthquake are caused by completely different things and they are independently occurring. But if you know that alarm went off, I'm sorry, if you know alarm went off, then once burglary occurs, you have less need for earthquake. Or if you know earthquake, then you have less need for burglary. So they are actually dependent, given the common effect. Yeah.
Just to make sure, are all three blocking types mutually exclusive?
What do you mean?
Like you can only have one kind of block.
No, basically you have X nodes and Y nodes. First, act as if you are enumerating every possible path between X and Y. And then see how those paths intersect the evidence nodes. And if each of those paths is blocked, then you're fine.
Okay, so can a specific path have more than one?
A path is a single path.
Oh.
Right, a path is a single path. You see what I'm saying? Okay. Now, so that's basically that. And how about, is burglary independent of earthquake given alarm? No. Because at the alarm, the two arrows are coming onto the alarm. So the evidence node is a common effect. So burglary and earthquake suddenly become dependent on each other, even if they were not dependent before. And finally, is burglary independent of earthquake given Mary? That's where actually the interesting part is neither Z nor any of its descendants are in E, and both path arrows lead to Z. So basically, turns out that this Mary, one way of thinking about the path between burglary and earthquake is essentially it's coming from burglary alarm to Mary and going back. You can have complex paths. And this is the descendant of a common effect. So neither the common effect nor any of its descendants should be given. Intuitively, what happens is if Mary is calling, you kind of know that alarm might have gone off. The moment you know that alarm might have gone off, you think burglary and earthquake are now conditionally dependent. Yeah.
If you add, say, one more node next to alarm that says breaking glass, which happened after burglary, and that leads to dawn calls, would B and E still be?
So the idea is for independence, every path should be blocked. For dependence, just one path needs to be not blocked. Do you understand what I'm saying? If between X and Y, there may be many paths. For X to be independent of Y given evidence, every possible path must be blocked for X to be independent of Y. If it's not independent of Y, then it's dependent. That means even if one path is not blocked, then it's dependent. So this is basically, it turns out that the deseparation condition is one of the big achievements of Bayes networks and the graphical models. Okay. In the sense that it completely captures the intuitions people had about what is independent of what given what. You don't really need to use this to use Bayes networks. In fact, you don't need to use Bayes networks. You can just buy stuff that does things, right? But the reason you might want to understand this is used in developing the algorithms that are and showing them to be correct for Bayes network inference. For example, I pointed out that the MCMC, Markov chain Monte Carlo, uses the Markov blanket to decide how to sample a node given the entire network. The way you sample a node given an entire network is just sample the node given its Markov blanket. And similarly, when you did likelihood weighting or rejection sampling, you essentially use the fact that a node is independent of its ancestors given its parents. And this is the most general expression of those independencies. Okay, that's that. Any other questions on this? Okay, so what happened now? Okay. So one other thing that I want to mention before we move on to learning is we had this namby-pamby thing all through the Bayes networks as to are the arrows supposed to be in the causal direction or not? And we essentially said both, that in fact Bayes networks do not require arrows to be in the causal direction. But a special class of Bayes networks may well have arrows only in the causal direction. And remember that having causal direction arrows requires that you know what causes what. That is huge knowledge. Learning correlation is one thing. Whenever I see this seems to be around, so they're correlated. Knowing which actually causes which is much higher, deeper type of knowledge. In fact, civilizationally, when we first came along as sentient beings, we were mostly only looking presumably at correlations. But the thing that really separated us from the other animals, even animals know to some extent some kinds of causation, some kind of correlation. The thing that really separated us is we have much better understanding of what causes what. You see what I'm saying? Now, if you happen to know what causes what, and if you drew the network in the direction such that the arrow direction is always in the direction of causality, then you call them causal Bayes networks. Knowing the domain, if you know the domain, writing it in the causal direction is the obviously right thing to do. You know the domain, you know what causes what. So who are you trying to impress by actually writing it in the anti-causal direction? In fact, if you remember, I showed this example for the Perl case, where if nodes are introduced in the non-causal order, there would be more edges typically. And those edges will also correspond to non-causal probabilities. So they are actually harder to assess for people. Okay. So if you know the domain, you want to write networks in the causal direction. Now, having done that, so that's basically, and then if you don't know the domain, when we start talking the rest of the class about learning, this is where people are really worried about. You can learn Bayes networks, you have no idea if they're causal or not. You understand what I'm saying? Because the way causal Bayes networks will be learned is you'll guess a topology, basically do the gradient descent to find the best probabilities. And the topology that you guess doesn't have to be causal because you don't know the domain. I mean, the machine doesn't know the domain. So it just basically puts some arrows. In that case, is it causal or not is a $1 million question. So causal learning is much harder, which is exactly why if you know a piece of knowledge that's hard to retrieve, remember it. You understand what I'm saying? As a civilization, if we basically, the most useful knowledge we have is what causes what. So if the civilization, some big fire is there and a whole bunch of things have to go away, what pieces would you keep? You should keep the causality because that stuff took you a long time to learn. You understand what I'm saying? By the way, I'm actually channeling this from Feynman, who basically starts, I think, his book or something saying, if the earth was to end and you can only remember one piece of information that is going to be usable by the next generation of humans, that might evolve, or humans or quasi-humans will evolve, what would be that piece be? And Feynman says, everything is made of atoms. For him, that is it. Because it wasn't obvious at all for us. It took like a humongous amount of physics to figure out that everything is made up of atoms. So that kind of knowledge that took us a long time and it's not easy to learn, you give it to the next generation. Right? So similarly, causality, if you know causality, you use it in the network. If you don't, it's much harder to figure out what causality is. As I said earlier on, to actually figure out whether A causes B, you have to do interventions. You have to stop A from being true and see if B is still true. Or you make B true and see if A becomes true. You understand what I'm saying? So these are costly experiments. People only see the observations in the world and say they don't know what causes what. Most of the beautiful examples I have given here, for example, the previous slide about the shoe size and IQ being connected, that's what machine learning systems will do. You'll give a whole bunch of data. They'll say, hey, looks like people with high shoe size, big shoe size have high IQ. So we'll start using shoe size as the surrogate for IQ. And you're all laughing, cackling away. That's because you understand the causality in that domain. If this was being done for some COVID vaccine, you have no idea what causes what. Do you understand what I'm saying? Causal learning is different from using causality when you know it. Yes, go ahead.
So is the domain of causal knowledge always comprised of facts?
What? Always?
The domain of causal knowledge always comprised of facts?
No, it's basically really a question of what causes what. That's it. The representation is a different issue. So you can have continuous variables, and a continuous variable causes another continuous variable. Right? For example, when I'm going in the car, I continuously press my accelerator at a certain angle. That seems to cause the speed to increase. So that's basically the causality. Believe it or not, actually machine learning right now is like rife with cases where people will, the machine will think the correlation is causation because it can't tell the difference. How will you tell the difference if you don't know? Yes, go ahead.
Why do you need learning if you have explicit knowledge?
Because we'll talk about it, because you may not have numbers. In fact, much of what we did before machine learning came along was all what you call statistics essentially involves at least topology of Bayes networks. And you're just assessing the numbers. You see what I'm saying? So it's actually a very good question, and you have to understand that since I must use learning, and if I use learning, why would I need explicit knowledge? So whatever explicit knowledge I have, I'll put it in a basket and throw it out, is exactly the problem with AI right now. You don't want to do that. If in your domain explicit knowledge exists, use it. If not, at least be aware of the fact that the correlations you learn are not causal. Did I do enough of a harangue on this? Okay, it's a very important harangue. Okay, so, but for these, a different question is, suppose you do know the causality. This is a simpler case. It turns out that people still can get confused between causation and correlation. Right? So what is the difference, for example, in this network? What is the difference between you seeing that the sprinkler is on versus you switching the sprinkler on? Is there a difference? Do you understand what I'm just saying? You saw that the sprinkler is on versus you made sprinkler be on. Is there a difference? And if you don't understand this, I'll tell you a great way of making planes, for example, in Thanksgiving time, very safe. This bozo came up with this idea. What did this bozo say? He realized that the probability that there will be 2 bombs on any given plane is extraordinarily low. 2 bombs, very, very low probability. So he decided to take 1 bomb with him and get on the plane. That reduces. Do you understand what I'm just saying? So once you have 1 bomb, then the other bomb is much less likely to be there. And you're going to use your bomb. You're not really going to demonstrate it during the plane. The other people might demonstrate it. What's wrong with this great idea? Right? Because the probability of 2 bombs being there is very low if just you happen to observe, not make it true. Do you understand what I'm saying? And this is as silly an example as it is. The world is full of this kind of nonsense when people confuse causation and correlation. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. So probability of y, given that x has been observed to have a value v, is not the same as probability of y, given that x has been set to value v. This you agree. Now the question is, since you have the network in front of you, given this network, if I said sprinkler is true, I observed the sprinkler is true, and if I ask what is the probability of greener grass, or if sprinkler is true, what's the probability that grass is wet, or sprinkler is true, what is the probability that there is rain? Sprinkler is on, what's the probability that there is rain? Sprinkler is true, what's the probability that there is cloudiness? All of these questions you can answer. But if I went ahead and switched on the sprinkler, I didn't observe, I switched on the sprinkler. Do you understand what I'm saying? I switched on the sprinkler. If I switch on the sprinkler, these probabilities should all change. In particular, if you switch on the sprinkler, cloudy should be independent of sprinkler. You guys notice that? Until you switch on the sprinkler, cloudy and sprinkler are dependent, because if the sprinklers are on, if the sprinkler sensing system is at all reasonable, it would have probably noticed that it's cloudy and it wouldn't have put it on. Or it's already raining, so it wouldn't have put it on. Do you guys get this, what I'm saying? So if I really do want to compute probability of, let's say, some x given do y, or a probability of y given to x, we need a method. And we do have that method, thankfully. And that method essentially is, if sprinkler is actually made to true, then first thing you say is you set sprinkler to true. Then you remove any edges incident on sprinkler, cut them off. Because you already made sprinkler true. Any probabilistic influences are no longer relevant if you made sprinkler true. In this particular case, there's only one edge incident on sprinkler. In some other thing, there may be 18 different edges incident on sprinkler. The moment sprinkler is on, all those edges are removed from the graph. So when you do that surgery, you now essentially, when you do that surgery, you essentially have just this network. That network, and this part isn't there. It's been cut off. And it's a Bayes network. It just happens to be the case that the prior for this is sprinkler equal to true is 1, sprinkler equal to false is 0. Then it's just a normal Bayes network. You can answer every question. You guys get what I just said? This is a great thing. In fact, this is the thing that actually Judah Pearl, who basically came up with the notion of Bayes networks, essentially wanted to get this stuff taken care of originally. So he made a detour, made Bayes networks, then started doing this. There are people with very big brains like that in computer science. There's a guy called Donald Knuth, who was writing art of programming books. He got sick and tired of the fact that he'll write the book carefully and he'll send it to the printer and the printer will make some mistake in the text typesetting. He says, if only I had some typesetting system, I'll make a small digression and invent tech. This guy is a theoretician. He invented tech. It was a small, not a small digression, a huge digression. And the and tech is like amazing, right? Because tech can generate its own fonts using Metafont, etc. So you did all that stuff, and then I say, okay, now I get back to writing the rest of the art of computing. The guy is still up there. I mean, you should look up his webpage. He's retired like a gazillion years back, and he still basically writes his books. So Pearl is one more of these kind of things. Okay, so he essentially made a detour, did Bayes networks, just so that he can really talk about causality. And I mentioned, remember Book of Why? Book of Why tells his story in his words about this intellectual journey. It's kind of cute to read if you're interested. But as far as I'm concerned, you should understand that if you do know the causal network, then you can use the causal network. I mean, you can use the network topology to answer queries more simply without doing experiments. If you don't have the network, you have to do experiments. You have to actually do intervention experiments. Here, you don't do intervention experiments. You are just doing surgery on the network. Not surgery on people, surgery on the network. This is sort of, to understand how important it is, you have to kind of think of how to do rejection sampling, how to do likelihood weighting if you don't have the network topology. Because you can sample from the real world. Sampling from the real world is extremely costly. Sampling from the network is just computationally costly. It doesn't really involve changing any entity in the world. And what he's saying is you can do the causality assessments also right ways if you happen to know the causal direction Bayes network to begin with. There's actually in the textbook, there's only 2 pages of this. I basically more or less gave you the first 1.5 pages. There is this other thing called backdoor criterion, which is also kind of quite useful. It's another case where you can avoid, given the Bayes network topology. Just like here, I just told you the sprinkler is off, a sprinkler is on. So you did a surgery and then you got a new Bayes network on which you can just do normal Bayes network inference. And the backdoor criterion does it for some more, slightly more broader cases. Okay. But my bigger point in understanding about causality is, given causality, you can still be bozos, right? Because people don't differentiate. I mean, here's all this. So I told you the Sherlock Holmes joke, right? So at the same time, there was I think BBC also ran a competition in the American audience. And the best joke for them is a different one. Let me tell you that joke, okay? So this guy and his, friend go for hunting, right? And then something happens. So this guy, calls up 911 and says, oh my God, seems like my friend is dead. He got hit and it seems like he's dead. So the 911 operator says, cool down, sir, cool down. First, we want to make sure that your friend is dead or not. So he says, wait. And then he puts the phone down. There's a big bang. And then he comes back and says, yes. That's the difference between causation and observation. Okay. Having said that, remember that in trying to, there are, as simple as this thing is that, when you are trying to observe something, you shouldn't cause it. You guys heard of the fact that cancer drugs can give you cancer? Certainly, COVID drugs apparently will give you COVID, according to some bozos, right? The point is that in any complex enough mechanism, you're trying to test if something is there. For example, to check if you have heart blockage, they do this thing called angioplasty. It's not that I had it. I know people who had it. Okay. The damn thing is that if the test is it's an invasive test. If the test goes bad, you will then actually have heart blockage. Or you may also be dead. Medicine is full of this sort of stuff. They want to have a test, which is why they don't give you the test like right away, because tests have additional negative causative side effects. So they have to weigh the positives and the negatives. So causality as a whole becomes extremely interesting in medicine because we don't understand mostly what causes what. You guys know that? How many of you read this book called The Emperor of Maladies? Anybody? What do you do in your spare time? Apparently no books. So it's a lovely book. It's Emperor of Maladies is a biography of cancer written by this guy called Siddharth Chatterjee. Amazing book. And the thing is, it essentially talks about how we try to treat cancer. We do know that we used to be quite a bit of bozos in the old days, where basically for everything, if you are having, let's say, fever, they will starve the fever. If you're having something else, what's happening? If you're having some other thing, they might actually put hot stuff on your thing to kind of reduce this problem. Basically scar you. Those were the bozos you thought. You know how much of a bozos we were until extremely recently. Those of you who know anything about how we treated breast cancer, it's just amazing how clueless we were. The best idea for treating breast cancer was removing the entire breast and also removing even more pieces. Why? Maybe it looks like it's a good idea. In fact, statistical reasoning is most useful. In fact, in many universities, the best statistics department is not in math, but in biology, because biostatistics is extremely important. Because people were doing these random kind of things, like I did this and they seem to be still alive, so must have caused this. So when the mastectomy didn't work, people came up with radical mastectomy. That is, remove even more stuff without understanding what causes cancer. You understand what I'm saying? It's simpler to understand, oh, I will never do that because but this domain, you know what causes what. You don't know what causes cancer yet. We still don't quite know what causes cancer. And about 10 years back, 20 years back, we were like basic bozos as a civilization. You see what I'm saying? So it's much, much, much harder to understand causality, which is why actually the randomized control trials came from biostatistics. Because they had no idea, so the best they could do is essentially take people who are identical in all respects and gives half of them this drug, other half don't give this drug, and see how they behave. And you can prove some mathematical theorems that all things being equal, if in fact these people are living longer, then maybe the drug caused them. That's how we were actually trying to decide whether drugs work. Does coffee help you or not? Pick the article you feel like reading. I like all the articles which say coffee helps me because I like coffee. We don't know whether coffee helps us or not. Because we are a complex system. Coffee might be helping, coffee might be hurting. And if we can't even tell about coffee, which has been around for quite a long time, do you think we can tell about drugs fully? No. RCTs give you some idea. Okay, so causality is a very big thing, and it becomes bigger the moment you miss it. If you don't know it, it's a huge thing. Because it's very, very, very easy to confuse correlation and causation. Any other question? Any questions on this? Okay. Let's now, having said that we can't easily learn causal networks, let's talk about, let's see how we learn correlational networks, basically Bayes networks, okay, not necessarily causal Bayes networks. So we assume that we know both the topology and CPTs for Bayes networks up until now. So the question is, if I only give you the data, that is the values of X for different samples, can you then compute a Bayes network which captures the data? And what do you mean by that? What I mean by that is the Bayes network actually represents a distribution. And if you generate data from Bayes network by sampling it, that should be indistinguishable from the data you saw. You guys get this? Training data has some distribution. The Bayes network that says I'm capturing this distribution has some topology and some CPTs. You know how to sample from the empty network, for example. So you sample this network and you get a bunch of samples. You compare those samples with other samples, they are basically statistically indistinguishable. Then you say, I captured the statistics. And learning that Bayes network with its topology and CPT is what Bayes network learning is all about. Okay. The basic idea, as you'll see in a minute, is just to maximizing the likelihood of the data given the network. And it turns out it's just the beginning, and it turns out it has all sorts of problems with that. And then that will lead us to Bayesian learning, which in essence says, consider all possible networks with all possible CPTs. Keep them all together and see, there is a prior on those networks themselves, and then there's a posterior after you see the data, and you use all these to decide the incoming test data. This is something that I said multiple times. I said it once more. Now I'm going to actually give you some details on this. Okay. Simple question. I have a coin. Okay. I don't quite know if that coin is a green type coin, which comes up with a probability of heads being 0.25, which means tails being 0.75. Or it is of the type probability of heads being 0.5, in which case tails is 0.52. So I'm not completely sure whether it's a fair coin or not. So somebody said, I gave you these coins, you can't easily distinguish them. They look similar, But one of them, it may be either this probability or this probability. First, do you guys realize that these two are Bayes networks? You see that this is a Bayes network. It's a Bayes network. It's a dumb Bayes network. It has one single node and it's prior. That's it. But it's a Bayes network. Everything is a Bayes network. Right? This is a Bayes network. So I'm actually trying to figure out whether this is the correct Bayes network or this is the correct Bayes network. I'm trying to learn this. I'm getting very close to what I wanted to do. So what do? I first go get some data. So I essentially toss this coin huge number of times. For me, huge is 12. And I told you what the coin came as in those 12 times. So it came heads, tails, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, 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 tails. Question. Now that you've seen this, what do you think is the right network? What? Green. He says green. Do people agree? You learned Bayes networks. This is what I'm saying. You learned Bayes networks. So now we put some jargon behind what we did and say that you are doing theory. What did you basically do? You computed, assuming this is the network. If this were really to be the network, what is the probability that you will observe this data? It will be multiplication of numbers. 0.25 times 0.75 times 0.75 times 0.25 times 0.75 times 0.25 times 0.75, 0.75, 0.75, 0.75, 0.75, 0.75. Do you guys see what I just did? Because they're all independent tosses. To be able to multiply it like this, I need to make sure that the data is identically and independently distributed. Which is why if you're a machine learning guy, you'll keep seeing IID. That means the data is identically and independently distributed. If it is the case that the first few samples came from one network, the other few samples came from other network, this bet is off. Furthermore, if there is some way in which I am connecting second task based on the first task, that means the tasks are not independent, then again, this calculation is wrong. Do people understand this? If you can say they are identical and independent, really what you're doing is you're comparing 0.25 cube times 0.75 power 9 to 0.5 power 12. Look, Ma, I did learning because I'm doing exponential amount of learning now. See what I'm saying? People understand this. What did I just do? I computed likelihood of data. Given the hypothesis. So my two hypotheses are, this is hypothesis H1, this is hypothesis 2. Right? So I computed likelihood of data with respect to both the hypotheses and saw which one is the higher, which hypothesis is giving higher likelihood to the data. And I said, that is the hypothesis. That's my winner. That's what you agreed. I mean, basically you said this and I'm just giving you a theory behind what we did. Okay. Now, of course, if I was trying to do this, one way now I can do Bayes networks looks like is I can compute, I can do pairwise comparison of any two pairs of networks to see which gives higher probability to the data and pick the better one. But really what it turns out is even for this stupid network, how many different configurations are there for this network? Infinite, because the probability of heads coming can be a real number between 0 and 1. So really what you're doing is you're trying to compute heads and pH equal to theta to be seen as sophisticated kind of people, you should use some Greek letters once in a while, right? So theta, you'll notice that the textbook is full of thetas. So theta would then be the probability for h. And the question is, what should be the value of theta such that theta power k times 1 minus theta power n minus k is maximized. If n is the number of training samples and there were k heads and n minus k tails, then the total probability of the data is theta power k times 1 minus theta power n minus k. Right? You need to maximize this. This is a continuous expression. How do you maximize or minimize continuous expressions? Take the derivative, equate it to 0. You don't like this kind of guys, so I would say, well, you want to see where this becomes maximum. I will take the log of this guy and see where it becomes maximum. And wherever that becomes maximum, this will also become maximum because log is a monotonic function. If I do that, what will I get? K log theta plus n minus k log 1 minus theta. You can actually very easily do this differentiation equated to 0, and you will find that the best value for theta is k by n. That's what you would have said. You know, if there were like 1 million passes you did, 15 times it came heads, the head probability is 15 by million. If you do calculus will tell you, yes, you're right. This is Bayes network learning with the way you actually do it, which is basically taking the likelihood expression, taking the logarithms of it, maximizing it. The reason you do logarithms is because when probabilities behave well, they will be big products. If you see a big product, you apply a log, so it becomes a big sum. In fact, it will be a big product of exponents. And log is like tailor-made for this because exponents will become multipliers. So basically, you try to maximize the log likelihood. Before we were minimizing the error, now we are maximizing the log likelihood. It looks like learning is always optimization. And we always use calculus. It looks great. Questions? Okay. Now, mess with your head. Okay. So this data is no longer there. It's off. It's off the table. I now only have this data. HTT. So I only got 3 data. Remember, I mean, you guys are like spoiled silly. You expect gazillion terabytes of data. Have you ever given anybody gazillion terabytes of what you mean? You give one example, and if they don't understand what you're saying, you slap them. I certainly do, because I give you once or twice, homeworks, and if you don't do well, I'll give you a bad grade. This is what I'm saying. And if I give too many examples, somebody will say, this is unfair. Too many examples are being given, too many homeworks, too many tests. Because we really don't want to spend that much time. Okay, so I only have 3 examples. HTT. Now tell me, which one do you think is the network that caused this data? Yes.
Green one, right?
So you would say green one. So that guy says it's a green one. So I saw HTT. I just got 3 samples. I tossed a coin. It came heads once, tails next 2 times. Then he decided that this coin is a really, really unfair coin, which comes 0.25 heads and 0.75 tails. That's what he said. Anybody else who wants to join him? Why are you not joining him? He's a nice guy. Why are you not joining him?
There's not enough data to make a conclusion.
What?
There's lot of data. To, I think,
What does that mean?
it's
What is this enough data nonsense? When is there enough data? Why exactly did you kind of decide this is nicer than this? I mean, so I'm assuming, okay, here is my question. There are three answers. One is what that guy said, green. The other is whatever the heck that color is, purple. The third is, I don't know, it's too little data. I'm assuming that you don't have the luxury of too little data because you have to learn. You have to learn what you think will you say about whether the coin is fair or not. This is a life and death question. Smart people get 100 out of 100 in every exam. I gave 2 exams in one, you got 100, another you got 30. I'm about to say you are not smart and give you a C-. What should I do? Do you understand what I'm saying? This is a fundamental trade-off. The reason it is connected to the data, but you remember that even though the data is less, more people, I'm hoping that more people think it's still a fair coin. Haven't you ever seen a coin, normal coin, which are all fair? And if you toss it, once it comes heads, twice it comes tails. It happens lots and lots of times. In fact, because it is 3, it will either come heads twice or tails twice. I mean, for those of you from India, there is no Cholet coin. It won't stop like this. Okay, so it's either 2 heads or 2 tails. So every coin in the universe, according to you, is biased if you only do 3 experiments. That doesn't make any sense. So you actually assume, unless there is a good reason, it's a fair coin. Yes.
You could have confidence value associated.
Again, so that is a way of doing the frequentist interpretation. The Bayesian interpretation essentially is that the hypotheses have a prior. Some hypotheses are more likely, some are less likely to begin with. It is true that Ebola causes runny nose. Ebola causes everything to be runny. But when you go with a runny nose to your doctor, they don't say, obviously Ebola. Or pretty good chance Ebola. They will get to Ebola like if they're basically being dragged to Ebola. First, they will say all sorts of other things. Most likely they say dust, guys, or common cold. I mean, what part of common and cold don't you understand? Because you assume that everybody gets common cold. So the idea is you assume there is a prior over hypothesis. And basically what you're doing in essence is you have decided that the prior probability of having a highly biased coin is quite low. So what you're actually maximizing is not just the likelihood of the data. It is some complex combination of the likelihood of the hypothesis and the likelihood of the data given that hypothesis. You understand what I'm saying? I can come up with a real crazy thing which can explain everything. Those are called conspiracy theories. They explain everything. Right? Like a million conspiracy theories about how Kennedy got shot by 1800 people doing complex coordination. That explains his death. But there are much simpler things that explain his death too. And the question of why simple is preferred is because you think simple has a higher prior probability. Taking the hypothesis probability into account is regularization. If you're just minimizing the error, training error, that's like maximizing the likelihood. If you're doing minimizing the error plus something else, such as the size of the weights, that is like maximizing the likelihood plus the probability of the hypothesis. Now it turns out you don't really need to do it this way. If you think about it, what you really should have done is kept all the hypotheses and their priors up. Start with the priors of the hypothesis, look at the data, compute the posteriors of the hypothesis, This is what I've been saying to you. And then when a new data comes, then ask every hypothesis, what do you think is this data's value? And take a weighted average, which is, weighted in terms of the probabilities of the hypothesis. So very quickly, before we leave, and I'll come back to this, or I'll make you look at this before you come next time, I'm going to do a very nice example that's in the textbook, okay? So I have 5 bags. The bags are made up of, there are only 5 types of bags. They're either all cherry or all lime, or 25%, 75% cherry, or 25%, 75%, 25% cherry and lime, or 50-50. And the bags are brown paper bags. It's like, you're buying beer and you don't want anybody to see. You're buying candy, they don't want to see what particular configuration you got. You open this bag and start sampling candy. And assume either that the bags are infinitely large, or that because you're worried about calories, you take a sample, look at it, and put it back. This is basically the earned model with replacement. That way the probabilities won't change. You see what I'm saying? So if I do this, the question is, if I, for example, got the following samples, lime, what actually is my hypothesis as to what the bag is? And rather than jump to any single conclusion, in fact, I actually have 2 questions. My first question is, what kind of the bag do I have? The second is, what flavor would the next candy be given what I have? Interestingly, this is statistics. That's probability. Figuring out from data what kind of bag you have is statistics. Having figured out what kind of bag you have, figuring out what the probability of the next candy is probability. So since I just want to show this, and I'll come back to this next time, here's a beautiful picture, and it's there in the textbook. Please read this before coming next time. Okay. So the way to look at this picture is look at these cross sections. When you looked at 0 samples, you assume the prior of the hypothesis to be all of them are equally likely. That's what you started with. You assume that the bag can be one of these 5 bags. That means all their probabilities are 0.2. Right? And so then basically what I'll do is I am essentially, as the more and more, actually, no, in fact, I think they even gave the priors, I guess, in this case. They actually gave the priors to make it interesting for you. They said 10% of the bags are of H1 type, 20 are H2 type, etc. Which is why here they are not all equal. They're different probabilities as were given in the priors. And whenever you see a data point, which is a candy, you can recompute the posterior on the bag type given the candy. As you're doing this, as you see more and more candies, you'll notice that the posterior probability distribution, by this time, the distribution says all lime bag has much higher probability than pretty much anything else. You see what I'm saying? And then in trying to compute what is going to be the next thing that I'm about to pick, you would essentially use the distribution to figure out each of the hypotheses, what's the probability that the next one would be lime, and multiply by that probability, sum them up. And the prediction would look like this. If you did this, you have done Bayesian learning. You have never made up your mind. You kept the entire set of hypotheses. You computed the posterior of the hypothesis. That's what you did, right? So I'll end this and say that Bayesian learning is an oxymoron. There is no learning in the sense of picking the winner. You keep everybody along. If you do that, all the problems we have talked about in machine learning will go away. There is no such thing as overfitting. There is no such thing as too little data. This is the optimal thing to do. And we'll come back and say this is too costly, and we'll make all sorts of appointments. Happy Thanksgiving.
If you're not in the pocket, right about sleeping, you would say.